Such a privilege to be back at FEUER, and it is a slightly artificial thing to speak to a room of believers as if we're all not. So thank you so much for your imagination in that. And let's get going. Amazon Prime has changed the way many people live. I don't know if anyone here uses Amazon Prime. I use it more often than I'd like to admit. And everything is different now. In one day, 24 hours, they will deliver whatever it is you've asked for. And in one of their adverts, they point out that they believe that they can deliver something even more than that. So one of these adverts they did on YouTube showed you a priest and an imam sitting down on sofas, sitting and drinking tea and laughing and chatting together. And when they get up to go, both of them reach down for their knees. They find their knees hurt because they're both men of prayer. And both of them laugh again and go home. And then you see the two of them thinking to themselves. And the next morning, each one opens the door to find an Amazon delivery. They open it up, and they've both ordered each other a knee brace. They both had the same idea, and they both laugh again. And the advert ends with the priest going into his church in his robes, and the imam going into his mosque in his robes, and both of them kneeling down to pray. Amazon Prime, bringing religions together. That advert is actually a picture of the world we all want, isn't it? Free from petty religious differences, free from ethnic strife and tension, full of harmony, laughter, cups of tea, people sharing wisdom, people learning together. The kind of world I want to live in, the kind of world we all do. And the thing that stops us from enjoying that world is the attitude among some saying that one religion is right, and so the others can't be enough. That one of them is somehow unique in what it has to say. Strikes us as so intolerant and exclusive, shatters the kind of world that advert talks about. And here's where it gets awkward. That is the kind of claim some religions make for themselves. That is how Jesus, the founder of the largest religion, speaks. In a first century eyewitness account of his life, we read him say, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And even as we hear a claim like that, perhaps we get a little bit worried. Because however peacefully a claim like that begins, it ends up being asserted at the end of a sword or a gun. Isn't that what history shows us? At best, we're afraid that claims like that will make us dismissive of other people. At worst, they'll encourage violence, the kind of violence we see in religious persecution. You think of the Yazidi minority group in Iraq, the Uyghur Muslims in China. Saying your truth is better than everyone else's, isn't that just another power play? Isn't that more cultural imperialism the world doesn't need? And isn't it reductive? If we're talking about God, the meaning of life, infinite things, surely one viewpoint can't say everything that has to be said, right? Surely that's boxing in something too big for boxes. Think about the popularity of someone like Jordan Peterson. If you ever watch him, he speaks for hours, and people watch him on YouTube for hours as he holds forth on phenomenology, insights from Buddhism, even the Bible. For someone like Peterson, we need God or something God-sized to face the challenges of life. But life is such a mystery, such a challenge, that he says we shouldn't be too picky about where that wisdom comes from. And doesn't that seem like the smart approach? Get whatever wisdom you can from any place you can find it. I was born to Indian parents in the Muslim Middle East. I have members of my family with Hindu convictions, and I love them very much. I've grown up surrounded by a dizzying variety of religious beliefs, and I'm sure you know that variety too. Maybe there's some of that variety in this room. And that makes our question even more pointed. Can we really say that one is right and the others are wrong? Doesn't that smack of intolerance? Isn't it so reductive? So maybe we think there's a wiser way. Perhaps everyone has a grip on a little bit of the truth, but not the whole thing. And so people talk about different paths up the mountain. That's what different religions are. Ooh. They seem to be heading off in different directions, but they all get to the top in the end. Isn't that right? And so it doesn't really matter which path you choose. What matters is that you get climbing. Or perhaps you hear a story of the blind men and the elephant. I'm sure you've known it. It's a story from the East. Blind men are sent, inexplicably, to investigate an elephant. And when they get there, each one grabs a different part of the elephant, and one of them holding the trunk says, "An elephant is very like a snake." The other holding a leg says, "An elephant's very like a tree trunk." And one of them feeling the side says, "An elephant's very like a wall." And you see the point. Each was partly in the right, all were in the wrong. And stories like that urge religious believers to acknowledge their limitations. Aim for a bit of humility. Yes, maybe you have a bit of the truth, but can you really say you have all of it? That others don't have any of it? Now, those stories do sound wise, but there's something going on we need to spot. The only way to know that all of the paths lead to the top of the mountain is if you're at the top. As if you know something, you have achieved something that none of these poor religions, huffing and heaving, have managed to find. And if we're saying that God is at the top of the mountain, whatever this attitude is, it isn't humble. The only way to know that it's an elephant that the blind people are handling is if you see the whole thing already. Oh, they're so blind, these religious believers, but not you. You see all of it. These stories sound like they're promoting tolerance, but they are wrapped up in exactly the same dismissive self-absorption they're trying to critique. They sound like they're acknowledging the bigness of God, but they're actually hugely reductive. They deny him agency and personality. Just think of the elephant. In that story, we're the ones questioning, seeking, talking, but God is just still and silent. It's not much more than background scenery. We're the action on the stage. These stories end up making a claim as arrogant as the ones they say they're trying to dethrone. And they claim a unique perspective, able to see what literally none of the religions they're talking about have managed to notice. And none of these stories take seriously how different the different religions are. There are superficial similarities, but beneath the surface, if we care to look, there are passionate and irreconcilable differences at play. When I talk to my Muslim friends, we agree that we disagree. They passionately reject the idea that Jesus is God. I passionately reject the idea that he isn't. Lump us both together. Tell us that we're really saying the same thing, and you solve nothing. It's logically incoherent, and you offend us both, because you're saying that our deeply cherished religious beliefs actually count for nothing. They all come out the same in the wash. Do you notice cultural imperialism isn't dismissed by this approach, it's only extended. If we want a world of harmony, dignity, and respect, then we need to recognize differences. I think all of us understand that. Using superficial similarities to screen out real differences isn't something we tolerate the rest of the time. Back home in Britain, something that happens to me more often than I'd like is that people confuse me with some other Asian man they've met. They'll call me Romesh or Rohit or Arjun or something like that. And it's obvious what's happened. They've looked and they've seen skin color, beard, and that's all that they've used to make their decision. And I don't like it because it shows they don't really care about me. They fixate on superficial things and miss everything about me that people who really know me actually value. They don't care about the details because they don't care about me. And everyone knows it's wrong when they realize their mistake. Most of these people are extremely apologetic. It's so patronizing to treat religious believers that way. And if you watch the video, you'll see it's the only reason the Amazon Prime advert works. The priest and the imam are talking, but we never hear what they're saying. Moving piano music drowns it out. Because the advert would work a lot less well if you could hear how fundamentally they disagree. And I sometimes wonder if saying that all religions are the same is actually a way of not having to engage with these different religions, not having to take them seriously, not having to take into account where different religious believers are coming from. We need to get better at listening. recognizing how different religious claims are instead of trying to whitewash them into some bland consensus. Because the world isn't getting more and more secular. It's actually getting more and more religious. All the statistics we have going globally show Christianity and Islam growing and atheism and agnosticism in decline. But there's actually an even bigger problem here than the way this attitude treats religious believers. We hate cultural imperialism because of how it silences voices. We hate it when people's self-expression is denied and when stereotypes or caricatures are stuck on them instead. If there is a God, why treat them any worse? I hate it when my identity is swapped around for any Asian man. Why would it be okay to treat God that way and project whatever ideas or opinions we have onto them? Which actually leaves us in an uncomfortable situation. All of these different religions saying utterly different things, incompatible. They could all be wrong, but they can't all be right. How would we know? What we need is someone to come down from the top of the mountain and tell us. We need the elephant to speak. And that is exactly what the Christian faith is all about. It claims that when we look at Jesus, we meet a God who's not distant, but steps down into his world as one of us so that we can know and the guessing can stop. A God who isn't silent and inert when it comes to our desperate questions, but has spoken. No other religion makes a claim like that. It wouldn't fit with other conceptions of the divine. And in fact, that's always been the case with the Christian faith. When it began, it was so different from the religions of the ancient world that Christians were first known as atheists. They didn't have recognizable rituals or temples or idols. They weren't religious enough. And their loyalty to Jesus as Lord, instead of the emperor in Rome, made them outcasts. We need to bear that in mind. Christianity has come to influence Western culture so profoundly that Christian ways of thinking have seeped into how we talk about this topic. Even to classify Hinduism or Buddhism as world religions actually reflect a Christian way of thinking. So we have a bigger question to answer. How did this despised minority in the Roman Empire come to shape our thinking so profoundly? That is a long and fascinating story with all sorts of subplots. But all of them reach back to the figure of Jesus of Nazareth. He has had such an impact on our world that we even measure history around his life. And for the rest of our time, I want to invite you to consider the impact knowing Jesus would have on your life. And we'll do that by thinking about three unique aspects of what Jesus has to offer. First, a unique claim, evidence in history. When we investigate Jesus' life, words, and actions, we're looking at historical evidence. We're able to dig into eyewitness accounts from the first century. Nearly 2 millennia of fascination, nearly 2 centuries of careful archaeological study and manuscript criticism have actually only increased our confidence in what we know of the Jesus of history. God stepping into time and space, there to be probed, is a claim like no other. And it's refreshing. Come to Jesus as a skeptic or an atheist, as I did, or from another religious background, and you don't just get an assertion thrown at you, you're invited into history to consider evidence and see for yourself. All that Jesus claims is anchored in historical events. And so everything he says of himself is falsifiable. You can go dig into this and try and prove it wrong. That's what I tried to do when I was an atheist. You can guess how that worked out. Unique claim. Second, a unique figure. Jesus speaks with an authority no other religious messenger or religious prophet has ever claimed. Read an account of Jesus' life, and you will find him forgiving sins, which only God is supposed to do, receiving worship, which only God is supposed to get, and almost casually positioning himself as the judge on Judgment Day. And you can guess who's meant to be doing that. He claims a mountaintop perspective for himself. I quoted those words earlier. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. No sane human being let alone universally revered historical figure, has ever spoken of themselves in that way. Not just an enlightened one, but the light of the world. Not just a teacher from God, but God come in person to do so much more than teach. Jesus doesn't claim to know the truth, but something even more, to be the truth. And that's key. See, it's not that Christians have it all figured out. In fact, Christians have often fallen short of Jesus in the way they've lived. I certainly do. And it's not that the world religions have nothing wise or noble or beautiful to say. All of them, in their own way, testify to humanity's longing and seeking for truth. But in Jesus, the truth himself has stepped in and offered himself to us. Which means that for the first time, we are not having to choose between the best human opinion on the matter. As wise as they might be, they are as finite and limited as we are. But rather in Jesus, responding to God himself, come in person to make him known. So becoming a Christian isn't about knowing everything, but wonderfully coming to know the one who does. So yes, there is a claim in history to investigate. But what Jesus is claiming to be makes this so much more than history. There is something life-giving and world-changing on offer, which could be yours. Which takes me to the third aspect. Third, a unique offer. Jesus says that acceptance with God isn't something we earn as a wage. It's something you can only receive as a gift. Every religion agrees that blessing, nirvana, salvation, whatever you want to call it, comes to those who earn their way. Now, the things you have to do vary dramatically in different religions. Maybe there are laws that you have to keep. Maybe there's a state of spiritual detachment you have to achieve, but the direction is the same. Acceptance comes on the basis of our performance. But Jesus' contribution is to reverse that. He agrees with the universal human intuition that there's a gap between us and our Maker. But he reveals a God whose goodness is so far above ours that we could never reach up to him. And he reveals us too. His teaching exposes us, showing how intolerance and pride, they lurk even in the very best works we offer. So how could we pay our way with our obedience? We'd be helpless if we tried. But Jesus doesn't leave us there. From the same account I quoted earlier, we read these words. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. You see, the direction of travel is exactly reversed from every other religion. So the story of reality is not us battling our way up to God, scrambling up the mountain. The story of reality is a God who has stepped down to us and shown his face in Jesus, come to meet us in our helplessness, not to point an accusing finger, but to open up his arms and embrace us in his love. This is a point of total contrast to every other religion. We might think about the great Hajj pilgrimage, which every Muslim is called to do, though not all of them can. It costs more money than some might ever have to get to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And when they get there, they're called to rush in the heat and through the crowds to try to get to the Kaaba, the Baytullah, the house of Allah. And even if the fixed points and the destinations bear different names, that is the story of every religion. Are striving to reach God's house. Do all that you can. Pay whatever price you must to get there. But in Jesus, there is a unique offer. Instead of waiting for us to get to him, as if we ever could, God has rushed out of his house in the heat and through the crowds to meet us. We could never get to him, but he loves us enough to give us what we could never earn. And that's what he offers to you today. He wants you to have it. And if that sounds too good to be true, just think about where this gift was given. This offer of life and love is made in the strangest place, Jesus' execution. Humanity meets our Maker and then nails him to a cross. Jesus comes face to face with human intolerance, with the forces of arrogance and violence. But he doesn't respond with still more violence or crushing condemnation. he meets it with open-armed love. As cruel and humiliating as Jesus' death was, it wasn't a surprise for him. He had said often and explicitly that by dying like this, Jesus would be restoring our broken world because he would be dying for us. He would be offering forgiveness and favor with God, even at the point of our rejection of him. He would come to face our hostility with an act of peace-making humility. And by rising from the dead, exhaust the power of violence forever. Our fear with exclusive truth statements is that deep down they're just power plays. They're just cultural imperialism serving our own agenda. But there has never been a power play like this. Stunning, self-sacrificial love. God meeting our intolerance and arrogance with mercy and humility. And that is where the world we're longing for begins, free from ethnic tension and strife. Jesus dismantles power plays because his ultimate move is a weakness play. That's what can break the cycle of aggression and recrimination and violence in our world. Because with Jesus, you find a truth claim that doesn't come with a sword or a gun in its hands, but only marks where the nails were. So the claim of Jesus made in and through his death is like no other. It is exclusive, but it's made by the one who chose to experience ultimate exclusion so that we might be welcomed in. And coming to know Jesus like that changes people. It humbles us radically, because to receive his welcome means acknowledging how we have rejected God, how we have been part of the problem, how we have sought and used power for our own advantage. That brings deep humility, the kind that makes forgiveness possible when you realize how you have been forgiven. We're radically humbled, but also full of joy. Because to receive Jesus' welcome is to experience unconditional love, to be made part of God's family, brought into a global community, which from the very beginning has been transcending every barrier, ethnic, social, culture, gender, you name it. Jesus comes to us with a gift, one that, if we receive it, will leave our world utterly transformed. To use an ancient description from the Bible, when people receive this gift, swords get beaten into plowshares. Violence gives way to peace, and sorrow to joy. That's the gift on offer to you today. Phan Thi Kim Phuc is better known to the world as Napalm Girl, and this image of her as a 9-year-old, severely burned by napalm, running in the Vietnam War, shocked the world. I'm sure you've seen it before. But let me quote her experience from many years after that picture was taken. She says, "I know what it is like to experience terror, to feel despondent, to live in fear. I know how wearying and hopeless life can be sometimes. After years in the spiritual wilderness, I felt the kind of healing that can only come from God." Because she heard this good news about Jesus and the gift he offers. And she continues, "My faith in Jesus Christ is what has enabled me to forgive those who had wronged me." Great. No matter how severe those wrongs were. Faith also inspired me to pray for my enemies rather than curse them. It enabled me not only to tolerate those who had wronged me, but to love them. Her life had been torn apart by ideological conflict. But when she met Jesus, she didn't find yet another ideology to fight for, but the end of conflict. Look at her words. She says she was able not only to tolerate, but to love. Can you imagine what our campus would be like if that was true of us? Can you imagine how loneliness would disappear? How this university would become the thing all of us longed for it to be? This is the world-changing gift that Jesus offers himself. And if you've not investigated him, then you owe it to yourself to do that. Take away an account of Jesus' life today. See for yourself. Because nothing compares to what Jesus offers. Because Jesus died for you, a unique security can be yours. There's someone who knows you completely, knows you even at your worst, and is still committed to you with a love that is stronger than death. That's the bedrock of an identity that can face deep crisis or painful rejection and come through the other side whole. Because Jesus rose again from the dead, you can have unique confidence. No, of course you don't have all the answers. Of course you don't know everything. But you can know the one who does. Jesus, the only figure in history or religion who speaks to us from the other side of death, and so is able to guarantee us life to the full. The one who promises to make all things new, put all things right, wipe away every tear. And because he'll do it with nail-scarred hands, you know that's a promise he can keep. And maybe for some of you, you don't know everything, but you do know enough. And as you look at Jesus and this offer, this gift he gives, you want it for yourself. You want to respond to him, to receive that gift, in fact, to welcome him into your life. The good news is, Jesus wants that for you even more than you do. He's even more committed to welcoming you in than you are to welcoming him. So before we get to questions, I want to finish by giving us all a chance to receive Jesus' welcome. And we do that by bringing ourselves to God, admitting the reality of our lives, the way that we've rejected God, the hurt we've caused others through our self-centeredness, that we're not in the right with God. Second, we believe in him. That word again from John's Gospel, that account of Jesus' life. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. We believe that Jesus has done everything needed to put us in the right with God, to bring us to him. Third, we commit to him, to life with him at the center, knowing and enjoying and following him. Three aspects there: admitting, believing, committing. And that might not be where you are right now, but for some of you, this might be the time to come and know the God who made you and receive that peace which can end all the violence. So I'd invite you to pray this prayer along with me now. Let's take a moment to be still. Jesus, I admit my need of forgiveness. When I look at what's wrong with the world, I admit that I have been part of the problem. But instead of leaving us guessing, you stepped in to make yourself known. You came and lived and died and rose again so that I can have life with you forever. I believe in you. I say yes to what you offer. I trust what you have done for me, not what I have to do for myself. And I commit to this new life with you. I welcome you. I want to live with you at the center. Jesus, come into my life to change me as I follow you. Amen. And if that's a prayer you've prayed, please come talk to me afterwards. I'd love to know more about your story, and I'd love to tell you what a wonderful thing has happened to you and how to take some next steps. But that's the end of this time, and now we've got some questions and answers. Thank you very much for listening.